Israeli airstrikes in Nabatea, a major town in southern Lebanon, injured 24 people on Tuesday, the Lebanese Health Ministry said. The Israeli military said in a statement that it had attacked Hezbollah vehicles that were transporting weapons on the edge of Nabatea. Lebanese caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati strongly condemned the two strikes on Nabatea and described them as a violation of the ceasefire arrangement with Israel. Mikati spoke with U.S. General Jasper Jeffers, who chairs the committee monitoring the ceasefire, in a phone call on Tuesday. Mikati's office said this in a statement. The Lebanese leader urged firm pressure on Israel to guarantee it implements the ceasefire according to international law, the statement said. Lebanon's Iran-backed Hezbollah group and Israel agreed on a ceasefire in late November, ending a conflict across the Israeli-Lebanese border that has killed thousands of people since it was ignited by the Gaza war in 2023. The U.S. said on Sunday the agreement between Lebanon and Israel, which included an initial 60-day period for the withdrawal of Israeli troops, would remain in effect until February 18, an extension to the January 26 deadline previously agreed. Hezbollah chief Naim Qassem said on Monday that the group would not accept any justifications to extend the period for Israeli troops' withdrawal from southern Lebanon. Israeli forces killed at least 24 people and wounded at least 141 in southern Lebanon on Sunday and Monday, during Lebanese Health Ministry said, as thousands of people tried to return to their homes in the area in defiance of Israeli military orders. Only one person has survived the plane crash in South Sudan, which killed 20 oil workers who were on board, the government said. The plane, which was heading to the capital Juba, crashed 3 minutes after take near the oil fields in Unity State on Wednesday morning, said Petroleum Minister Port Kang Chol. Among the victims are 5 foreign nationals, 2 Chinese, 1 Indian, and 2 Ugandan crew members. The 15 other victims were all South Sudanese. The cause of the crash has not been determined, but authorities said they are investigating the case. Our thoughts and condolences go out to the families and loved ones of those on board during these incredibly difficult times, said Cho. The oil workers, who were all men, worked for the Greater Pioneer Company GPOC, and the plane was operated by Light Air Services Aviation Company. GPOC is a joint venture that includes state-owned oil companies from India, China, Malaysia and South Sudan. It was meant to be a routine exploration mission. South Sudan's aviation infrastructure is not well developed and the country has a poor safety record. Air accidents are common and frequently blamed on overloading of the aircraft or the weather conditions. In 2021, 5 people were killed after a cargo plane carrying fuel for the UN's World Food Programme (WFP) crashed near Juba. West African Regional Bloc (ECOWAS) has formally recognized the withdrawal of Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso after more than a year of diplomatic tensions. The latest development marks a significant shift in regional diplomacy. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, announced the 3 countries' withdrawal in a statement on Wednesday. But ECOWAS urged its remaining 12 members to continue to recognize the national passports of the departing nations and trade with them until otherwise advised. ECOWAS President Omar Touré told reporters in Abuja, where the bloc has its headquarters, that the decision was in the spirit of regional solidarity and interest of the people. He said the Commission has invited the 3 countries to a technical meeting, noting that any member state was welcome to return. Relations between the trio and the regional bloc soared after the July 2023 coup that hosted Niger's President Mohamed Bazoum, prompting ECOWAS to demand his reinstatement and threaten military intervention. In response, Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso announced their exit last January and accused ECOWAS of failing to safeguard member states and of aligning too closely with foreign powers. They also created a confederation called the Alliance of Sahel States and strengthened alliances with Russia, Turkey and Iran to address internal security threats such as jihadists and armed gangs, as well as external pressures. ECOWAS was founded in 1975. It is West Africa's most influential political and economic bloc, but has faced difficulties in recent years amid a rash of military takeovers. In December, it granted the 3 departing countries a 6-month grace period to reconsider their decision. But on Tuesday, thousands of people rallied in support of the exit in Niger and Burkina Faso. Ghana has signed a memorandum of understanding with its official creditors that formalizes a debt restructuring agreed last year, its finance ministry said on Wednesday. The signing of the document is the latest milestone in the West African gold and cocoa producers' long-running debt restructuring saga, after it defaulted on most of its external borrowing in December 2022. Ghana and its official creditor committee reached an agreement in June last year. All participating creditor countries have now signed the deal, the finance ministry statement said, adding that it provided significant debt service relief over its International Monetary Fund loan program. Ghana is still speaking to its commercial external creditors to finalize restructuring agreements with them, the statement also said. Rebels backed by Rwanda captured more towns in eastern Congo on Wednesday as they moved beyond the key city of Goma in an apparent attempt to expand their control in the conflict-battered region. The rebels advanced toward the center of South Kivu province after taking several towns, including Kalungu, Kanyerizi, and Mukingwaja, according to a local civil society leader and an aid worker in the area. They spoke on condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to talk to the media. UN spokesman Stephen Dujarric said the developments were concerning and that the United Nations was taking measures to protect civilians and UN staff. The advance also raised fears of a prolonged occupation by the rebels, who have said they plan to set up a new administration in Goma, a city of 2 million people. Left unchecked, the fighting could spread, recalling the horrors of the late 1990s and early 2000s when millions died, the crisis group said, citing the last multi-country war there. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem on Wednesday revoked an 18-month extension of temporary protected status for an estimated 600,000 Venezuelan migrants in the United States. Today, we withdrew the ridiculous Biden administration order that allowed unvetted illegal immigrants from Venezuela, including members of the vicious gang Tren de Aragua, to stay in our country and violate our laws, DHS officials said Wednesday in a post on X. Former President Joe Biden on January 17 extended temporary protected status or TPS for Venezuelan migrants and others via an executive order. The extension applies to migrants from Venezuela, Ukraine, Sudan and Haiti, but Noem's revocation only affects Venezuelans. Noem vacated the January 17 notice and reverted to the prior TPS policy for Venezuela that the DHS announced in October 2023. The notice extended prior temporary protected status of Venezuelan migrants for 18 months, which expires this year on September 10. Temporary protected status enabled Venezuelans and others subject to similar protections to obtain work permits while in the United States. The Trump administration has revoked an extension of deportation protections that the previous Biden administration granted to more than 600,000 Venezuelans already in the United States. The Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem, on Tuesday rescinded an 18-month extension of the Temporary Protected Status TPS program, which allows for people to temporarily stay in the U.S. if they cannot return safely to their home country. The federal program is available for people fleeing ongoing armed conflict, environmental disasters, or extraordinary and temporary conditions. The designation gives people the legal authority to be in the country, but does not provide a long-term path to U.S. citizenship. Former President Joe Biden's Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas issued the extension earlier in January before Donald Trump took office, citing the severe humanitarian emergency the country continues to face due to political and economic crisis. Haiti's Transitional Council President Leslie Voltaire said in an interview on Wednesday that a date for the Caribbean nation's long-awaited general elections has been fixed for around November 15th of this year. Haiti has lacked elected representatives since January 2023 and has not held elections since 2016. The country's capital is almost entirely controlled by armed gangs, and leaders have said security must first be established to hold a free election in 2026, Voltaire told TV5 Monday, referring to a constitutional limit that has been repeatedly sidestepped as governments cited the difficulty of holding elections under a worsening security crisis. Over 1 million Haitians have been internally displaced due to the conflict, and around half of the population, over 5 million, are going hungry as broadly allied armed gangs make territorial gains around the capital and in key agricultural areas, forcing key ports to repeatedly shut their operations. Chile's Congress gave its final approval to a reform that will boost pensions for current and future retirees, handing President Gabriel Boric only a partial win following major concessions from his government. The lower house of Congress backed the legislation on Wednesday after the Senate gave its approval through both general and item-by-item votes early on Tuesday. The go-ahead followed in marathon of talks between lawmakers and the government over both the bill's contents and its financing. The reform represents the best attempt at reaching middle ground on arguably the most contentious problem gripping Chile. There's no question that the current system is detrimental to women and often leaves retirees in general living in poverty or having to find other sources of income in old age. Meanwhile, the private pension funds, known as AFPs, are the bedrock of the local capital markets, meaning any legal overhaul risk hiking investors. Chilean lawmakers kept the AFPs in place, elating many of the center-right and in the business community, while leaving Boric and his allies deeply frustrated. On top of that, the AFPs will be in charge of managing new employer pay-ins to workers' individual pension accounts that are equivalent to 4.5% of salaries. U.S. judge granted a restraining order to stop a federal funding freeze despite the Trump administration rescinding it on Wednesday after conflicting messaging from the White House led to further confusion after days of chaos. In a brief memo, the White House Office of Management and Budget (OMB) said it rescinded a policy it announced on Monday that temporarily paused trillions of dollars in government support for everything from social services to security programs in Trump's first policy reversal since taking office last week. The announcement of the funding freeze had thrown into question whether the government would continue honoring its obligations to pay for an array of programs, including the health insurance for disabled and low-income Americans provided by Medicare. However, the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt attempted to downplay the OMB's retraction of its original memorandum. This is not a rescission of the federal funding freeze, it is simply a rescission of the OMB memo, Leavitt wrote on X. Why? To end any confusion created by the court's injunction. The president's EOs on federal funding remain in full force and effect and will be rigorously implemented. A federal judge on Wednesday issued a restraining order against the funding freeze proposed in the OMB memo, pointing to Leavitt's comments and contradictory messages from the White House. That order came after a different judge temporarily blocked the funding freeze on Tuesday. The Rhode Island-based federal judge, John McConnell, intervened at the behest of Democratic state attorneys generals amid the confusion, with the White House saying it had rescinded the memo but was not backing down from a freeze on funding in areas targeted by the recent executive orders. McConnell asked the attorneys general to submit a proposed temporary restraining order for him to sign. President Donald Trump signed several sweeping executive orders on Wednesday to overhaul the American education system, primarily by removing so-called progressive ideologies from school hallways and classrooms. The executive orders come as Trump has rallied or railed, against the U.S. education system, accusing it of indoctrinating children in radical anti-American, racist and gender ideologies. However, critics swiftly condemned the executive orders as being an attack on LGBTQ students and on the accurate teaching of U.S. history, specifically concerning slavery and racial injustice. The order calls for schools to provide students with an education that instills a patriotic administration for the United States, while claiming the education system currently indoctrinates them in radical anti-American ideologies while deliberately blocking parental oversight. Without proof, the order claims that the students are forced to adopt identities as either victims or oppressors solely based on their skin color and made to question whether they were born in the wrong body. The order threatens to sanction schools that support LGBTQ students, but specifically trans students, by promoting what it calls social transition, meaning acceptance of a student's gender identity. Schools that provide trans students with psychological or psychiatric counseling, modify their names, use pronouns to reflect their gender identity, permit them to use gender facilities that match their gender identity, or allow them to participate in athletic competitions on gendered teams that reflect their gender identity will have federal funding threatened, it said. The legality of some of its directives were unclear, with civil rights organization Lambda Legal calling it a patently unconstitutional nonsense designed to demean transgender and LGBTQ students by denying their existence. President Donald Trump signed an executive order on Wednesday to combat anti-Semitism and pledged to deport non-citizen college students and others who took part in pro-Palestinian protests. A fact sheet on the order promises immediate action by the Justice Department to prosecute terrorist threats, arson, vandalism, and violence against American Jews, and marshal all federal resources to combat what it called the explosion of anti-Semitism on our campuses and streets since the October 7, 2023 attack on Israel by Palestinian Islamist group Hamas. To all the resident aliens who join in the pro-jihadist protest, we put you on notice. Come 2025, we will find you and we will deport you, Trump said in the fact sheet. I will also quickly cancel the student visas of all Hamas sympathizers on college campuses which have been infested with radicalism like never before, the president said, echoing a 2024 campaign promise. Rights group and legal scholars said the new measure would violate constitutional free speech rights and would likely draw legal challenges. A judge sentenced an emotional former Senator Bob Menendez to 11 years in prison on Wednesday for a years-long bribery and corruption scheme that rewarded him with gold bars and stacks of cash. Menendez DNJ had pleaded with U.S. District Judge Sidney Stein of the Southern District of New York for mercy, twice breaking down in tears. I have lost everything, he said after he recounted actions he said he had taken to help others while he was in the Senate, a job he resigned from after he was convicted. For a man who spent his entire life in public service, every day I am awake is the punishment. Menendez, who was chair of the powerful Foreign Relations Committee at the time he took the payoffs. The judge appeared unmoved and noted that while Menendez had done some positive work, the evidence was overwhelming and he had failed the voters of New Jersey. Stein said Menendez would not have to begin his sentence until June 6 so he can attend the trial of his wife and co-defendant Nadine Menendez. I want him to be able to be present for his wife, Stein said. Prosecutors had recommended a sentence of 15 years for Menendez, who is 71, which his attorneys called vindictive and cruel, and a life and death sentence. Menendez was found guilty in July of extortion, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and acting as a foreign agent after a sensational trial in which prosecutors charged that he accepted bribes, including cash and gold bars, to benefit the government of Egypt and Qatar. 2 co-defendants were found guilty as well and were each sentenced on Wednesday to several years in prison. Kansas is grappling with what state health officials say is one of the largest tuberculosis outbreaks there since the 1950s, one that has infected dozens of people. The epicenter of the outbreak, which began last January and was blamed for 2 deaths in 2024, is in Yandot and Johnson counties, according to the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. Both are part of the Kansas City, metropolitan area in the eastern part of the state. It is unclear what caused the outbreak, and state health officials did not immediately respond to questions about the origin. While the state health agency described the risk to the general public as very low, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention had 4 employees on site in Kansas as of Tuesday to help with contact investigation, testing and screening, a spokeswoman for the center said in an email. The team was also coordinating with community leaders to educate the public about tuberculosis, an infectious disease that is caused by bacteria and most often affects the lungs. The disease, which is curable, spreads through the air when infected people cough, sneeze or spit. Without treatment, which usually involves antibiotics, tuberculosis can be fatal. Symptoms can include a prolonged cough, fever, and unexplained weight loss. As of Friday, the most recent day that data was available from health officials, 67 people were being treated for active cases of tuberculosis as part of the outbreak in Kansas. There were 60 cases in Wyandotte County and 7 in Johnson County. We'll go on a short break, and when we return, we'll continue with the rest of the stories. Please stay with us. One man was killed and two others were injured at an oil field in Texas on Monday, where Pro Petrol Services was conducting fracking operations at a well site owned by Permian Resources Corp. Edward Rodrigo, 45, died after a pressurized device ruptured. Two others were hospitalized. Pro Petrol shut down fracking operations and powered down the area for a safety investigation, according to a statement from the Reeves County Sheriff's Office. Pro Petrol confirmed the incident in a statement and said the company was working with the relevant authorities to determine the cause of the incident. Permian Resources Corp did not respond to a request for comment. The Sheriff's Office Criminal Investigation Division investigators determined that a pressurized line containing about 9,000 pounds per square inch detached from a fracking unit, causing the incident. Investigators located a pipe that had been disconnected during the incident with valves attached to both ends. Sheriff's Office found no evidence on foul play. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration is investigating the incident. Dozens of refugees who both a decade ago and expected to resettle in the United States, have been affected by the Trump administration freeze on refugee programs, an Australian official told reporters. Australia is awaiting further advice from the United States government on the ongoing operation of its refugee program, suspended by an executive order signed by President Donald Trump on January 20th. A Home Affairs spokesperson said, less than 30 transitory individuals continue to pursue resettlement in the United States through the U.S. resettlement arrangement. Cases are at various stages of the process, he said. Australia does not allow asylum seekers who arrive by boat to settle in the country. Canberra introduced a thought policy of offshore processing a decade ago, where boat arrivals were transferred to camps in the Pacific Island nations of Nauru and Papua New Guinea (PNG) for assessment of refugee claims. Under a 2016 deal struck with the Obama administration, the United States agreed to resettle up to 1,250 refugees from the PNG and Nauru offshore processing centers. In his first presidency, Trump complained about the deal but also accepted it. The Home Affairs Department said in August that 1106 refugees had been able to resettle in the United States under the agreement, although many were also at various stages of pre-departure activities. The center-left government of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has stepped up efforts to show it is deterring boat arrivals with a national election due by May. Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke will travel to Nauru on Thursday and said in a statement that he will visit the regional processing center. Airbus plane belonging to South Korean carrier Air Busan caught fire on Tuesday at Gimhae International Airport in the country's south while preparing for departure to Hong Kong, fire authorities said. All 169 passengers and 7 crew members were evacuated, with 3 having minor injuries, fire authorities in Busan said. The fire service was alerted to the fire, which began inside the plane just before 10:30 p.m., it said. South Korea's Yonhap news agency said it began in the plane still. Footage aired by local broadcasters shows evacuation slides deployed on both sides of the single aisle plane, with emergency workers tackling smoke and flames from the jets. Later footage from Yonhap from reporters showed burned out holes along the length of the fuselage roof. The International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, the UN agency, requires accident investigators to produce a preliminary report within 30 days of the accident and encourages a final report to be made public within 12 months. The Boeing 737-800 jet from Bangkok and scheduled to arrive at Muan International Airport overshot the runway as it made an emergency belly landing and crashed into the localizer structure, killing all but 2 of the 181 people and crew members on board on December 29. The localizer aids navigation of an aircraft making an approach to the runway, and the structure, built of reinforced concrete and at Muan Airport, supporting the system's antennae, was likely a cause of disaster, experts have said. Philippine priests accused of sex abuse remain in active ministry in the Catholic majority country. A US-based abuse tracking group said on Wednesday, January 29, urging the country's bishops to take action and hold the alleged perpetrators accountable. Bishop.accountability.org, which tracks abuse in the Catholic Church, said 82 priests and brothers from the Philippines and some who served in the country for a period in their lives had been accused of sex abuse. At least 7 of the accused priests continue to serve in parishes across the archipelago. Some as recently as last month, the group's co-director, Annie Barrett, said at a news conference on Wednesday. Philippines bishops have a deep sense of entitlement in withholding information on the abuse of priests in their diocese, said Barrett Doyle, who also urged the government to prosecute the alleged offenders, adding that none of those accused have been convicted for wrongdoing. For decades, sex abuse scandals have shaken the Catholic Church across the world. Pedophile priests and efforts to cover up their crimes have damaged its credibility and cost hundreds of millions of dollars in settlements. ABS-CBN News has reached out to the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines, CBCP, for comment on the statements made by Bishop. Millions of devout Hindus thronged the northern Indian city of Prayagraj on Thursday for the Mahakumbh festival, a day after dozens died in a stampede in the holy center of the most auspicious day of the six-week event. Train and bus stations in the city saw a surge in crowds as people continued to arrive for the festival, although some devotees remained nervous after the deadly crush. Krishna Soni, a student from the western state of Rajasthan's Bikaner city, and his family of 8 linked themselves together with string to ensure they would not lose each other in the massive crowd. "We are walking very carefully and trying to avoid the crowded areas," he told reporters. Police said 30 people were killed on Wednesday in the stampede at the world's biggest gathering of humanity, and 60 were injured, but sources said the death toll was more than 50, and the reporters witness counted at least 39 bodies in the morgue. Police officers, however, stuck by the official toll. "Many people die here every day due to various reasons. Those extra dead bodies could have been from other cases. The injured are totally out of danger," senior police officer Vaibhav Krishna told reporters. A man who sparked violent protests after burning the Quran has been shot dead in Sweden, according to local media reports. Salwan Momika, 38, is reported to have been killed in an apartment in Södertälje, Stockholm on Wednesday evening. Unrest broke out after Mr. Momika set fire to a copy of Islam's holy book outside Stockholm Central Mosque in 2023. Mr. Momika and his partner were charged in connection with the Quran burning, but the verdict due to be delivered on Thursday, as was postponed after it was confirmed that one of the defendants had died, Stockholm District Court said. Stockholm police told reporters that a man in his 40s was found shot in an apartment and later died. French budget talks deterred on the brink of collapse on Wednesday, a day after Socialist Party officials suspended their participation in protests over remarks about immigration by Prime Minister François Bayrou, threatening his government's survival. The flare-up over the comments by Bayrou, who said many French people felt submerged by immigration, underlies the complexity of his political balancing act. His comments were chaired by far-right lawmakers from the National Rally, the largest single party in parliament, but prompted the socialists to abandon budget talks, threatening the passage of the bill and raising fresh doubts about the stability of Bayrou's administration. The socialists' walkout comes at a crucial moment with the 2025 budget bill entering its final stage. On Thursday, a small panel of senators and parliamentarians is due to trash out a final text before it heads to the lower house floor on Monday. "We suspend our negotiations because the words from the Prime Minister were not dignified," Philip Brown, a socialist lawmaker involved in the budget talks, said in an interview with Sod Radio on Wednesday. Brown said the socialists could return to the table if Bayrou withdrew his immigration remark. Government spokesperson Sophie Primas said the Premier had no such plans and the budget must not be taken hostage by the dispute. Negotiations were not dead, she said, and Brown said he hoped they would resume. Failure to pass the 2025 budget has already rattled investors while sapping businesses and household confidence. The government has held to make billions of euros in concessions to forge a bill with a chance of getting passed. Rebuke the government said in a statement that the new objectives set out under its commitments to the Paris Agreement are to be primarily achieved via domestic measures. Switzerland's government on Wednesday approved new climate targets, proposing a cut in greenhouse gas emissions by 2035 of at least 65% compared to 1990 levels. Switzerland's efforts to counteract global warming came under close scrutiny last year when a top European court ruled that the country was not doing enough to tackle climate change. The government said in a statement that the new objectives set out under its commitments to the Paris Agreement are to be primarily achieved via domestic measures. By 2025, Switzerland should reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by at least 65% compared to 1990 levels and by 59% on average between 2031 and 2035, it said. Switzerland had previously committed to cutting greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030 from 1990 levels. The Swiss cabinet said it had adopted an amendment to its long-term climate strategy and would submit its new plans to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change by February 10. In that submission, Switzerland reports on the role of renewable energies and nuclear energy in achieving climate neutrality, the cabinet added. That's the international news for today. I am Francis Necker. Thank you for watching. You can follow us on our social media platforms, X, formerly Twitter, at Atlantic TV.